A flickering candle casts light on a world unseen for 3,000 years. This is the moment Howard Carter first peered into the lost tomb of King Tutankhamun, a discovery that would rewrite everything we thought we knew about ancient Egypt. By the end of this journey, you will uncover the true story behind the gold, the curses, and the shocking scientific secrets locked within those walls. We will explore a dagger forged from a fallen star, a king's missing heart, and a legacy shadowed by modern scandal. What does it feel like to stand on the threshold of eternity? But who was the young ruler sealed inside that golden coffin? Tutankhamun was a boy thrust onto the throne of a divided empire. He was likely the son of the pharaoh Akhenaten, a revolutionary who had upended Egyptian society by abandoning the traditional gods to worship a single deity, the sun disk Aten. This period, known as the Amarna era, was one of immense turmoil. When Akhenaten died, the old priesthoods and the people were desperate for a return to normalcy. The crown passed to a child, perhaps only 8 or 9 years old, named Tutankhamun. His very name honored his father's god, but within a few years it was changed to Tutankhamun, a powerful declaration meaning the living image of Amun, the chief god of the old pantheon. This was not a minor detail. It was the central project of his reign, a deliberate and strategic reversal of his father's radical reforms. Guided by powerful advisors, the boy king spent his short life. He died around the age of 18 or 19, working to restore the temples, the festivals, and the ancient gods his father had cast aside. He was trying to heal a nation, and then, suddenly, he was gone. His death was so unexpected that Egyptologists believe his tomb in the Valley of the Kings was not even meant for him. It was smaller, less decorated, and tucked into an unusual spot, likely a noble's tomb hastily repurposed for a king. This rush job, this historical accident, is precisely why Howard Carter found it 3 millennia later. While the grand, official tombs of greater pharaohs were plundered over centuries, Tutankhamun's modest, forgotten burial remained sealed. It was not a time capsule of his greatness, but a snapshot of pure necessity, a frantic assembly of everything the ancients believed a king, even a young one, would need for eternity. That frantic assembly is what makes it the most important archaeological discovery in history. The boy king's sudden death left behind a tomb and a mystery that would wait 3,000 years for an answer. That answer came in the form of a man named Howard Carter, an artist turned archaeologist with a singular, almost fanatical belief. He was convinced that the Valley of the Kings still held one undiscovered royal tomb, that of Tutankhamun. For years he had walked the valley, mapping every inch, studying the patterns of where workers' huts had been built. He theorized that one cluster of these modest stone huts, built over 3 millennia ago, might be hiding something magnificent beneath them. But archaeology costs money, a lot of it. Carter's patron was the 5th Earl of Carnarvon, a wealthy English aristocrat with a passion for collecting and a fragile constitution. The dry Egyptian climate was good for his health, and funding digs became his expensive hobby. For 5 long seasons, Carter directed crews to move mountains of ancient rubble, all under the burning Egyptian sun. They found little. Each year, Lord Carnarvon's patience grew thinner, his investment seeming more and more like a fool's errand. By the summer of 1922, Carnarvon had reached his limit. He called Carter to his English estate and delivered the news: the funding was over. The search was finished. Carter, desperate, made one final plea. He asked for one last season, to dig in that one specific area near the workers' huts he had always suspected. Perhaps out of a sense of loyalty or a flicker of shared hope, Carnarvon agreed. It would be the final season. Carter returned to Egypt in late October, his last chance resting on a single, focused excavation. The work began on November 1st. Just 3 days later, on November 4th, a stillness fell over the dig site. Carter's team was clearing away the ancient huts when they hit something solid just beneath the sand. It was a step cut into the bedrock. With frantic care, they brushed away more debris, revealing a second step, then a third. They had found a staircase descending into the earth. By the next day, they had uncovered 12 steps leading to the upper part of a sealed doorway, plastered over and stamped with the circular seals of the royal necropolis. Carter's hands must have been trembling. He immediately sent a telegram to Lord Carnarvon in England. It read, "At last have made wonderful discovery in valley. A magnificent tomb with seals intact, recovered same for your arrival, congratulations." He then did the hardest thing an archaeologist could do. He ordered the staircase filled back in, posted guards, and waited. For 3 agonizing weeks, he waited for Carnarvon to make the long journey from England, all while knowing that the threshold of history was just beneath his feet, sealed but untouched. The world was about to change. The waiting ended on November 26, 1922. Lord Carnarvon and his daughter had arrived, and the small team gathered once more at the top of that rediscovered staircase. The air was thick with a silence that felt ancient. Carter's workers cleared the sand again, revealing the full plastered doorway. Now, in the clear light, they could study the seals imprinted in the dried plaster. There were the official stamps of the royal necropolis, showing a jackal, the guardian Anubis, crouching over 9 bound captives. This was the seal of the tomb guards, a declaration that this was a king's property protected by divine power. But scattered across the door were other, more telling marks. The seals were broken and then resealed not once but several times. This door had been opened and closed again in antiquity. The hope of a completely untouched tomb began to fade, replaced by a more complex and ominous question. What had happened here? Had robbers gotten in? Had priests resealed it after a theft? There was only one way to know. With meticulous care, Carter began to chip away at the upper left corner of the doorway, working around the ancient seals to preserve them. The hole was just large enough to peer through. The passage beyond was filled from floor to ceiling with limestone chips and rubble, clear evidence of a deliberate blocking, another layer of security. His heart must have sunk. This was not an open corridor to glory, it was another obstacle. They spent the rest of that day and all the next clearing that rubble-filled corridor until they stood before a second sealed doorway almost identical to the first. This was it, the true entrance. The tension was now unbearable. In his own writings, Carter described his hands shaking so badly he could barely work. He made a small breach in the top left corner of this second door. He inserted a heavy iron testing rod to check for voids or traps. Finding none, he widened the hole slightly. The world beyond was pitch black, and the air that escaped was warm, carrying a scent not of decay, but of ancient spices and time itself. Carter lit a candle, testing the air for foul gases, then brought its flame to the breach. Behind him, Lord Carnarvon, unable to stand the suspense any longer, whispered the question that has echoed through history. "Can you see anything?" Carter, his eyes adjusting to the gloom beyond the flickering flame, was struck utterly dumb. Gold everywhere, the glint of gold. Shapes of fantastic animals, statues, and strange objects emerged from the darkness. It was a chaotic jumble of treasures piled to the ceiling. After a long moment, he found his voice, replying with the famous, understated words, "Yes, wonderful things." He then widened the hole, and with a trembling hand held an electric lamp inside, sweeping its beam across a scene no human had witnessed in over 3,000 years. They were looking into the antechamber, a room that was not a serene museum display, but a storage closet for eternity, packed to the rafters with the most magnificent chaos imaginable. The beam of Carter's lamp revealed not a solemn burial chamber, but a room in a state of magnificent upheaval. It was as if the contents of an entire palace had been violently shaken and then poured into this single confined space. The antechamber was a 3-dimensional puzzle of staggering opulence, where the sacred and the practical were thrown together in a breathtaking jumble. Dominating the center were three enormous gilded couches, each crafted in the form of a protective animal. One took the shape of a lioness, sleek and powerful. Another was a cow representing the celestial goddess Mehit-Werti, a symbol of the sky and rebirth. These were not mere furniture, they were divine vessels intended to carry the king's spirit in the afterlife. Tucked against a wall, almost hidden by the clutter, was a work of art that would become iconic, the golden throne of Tutankhamun. Its back panel showed an intimate scene of the young king, relaxed in his chair, while his queen, Ankhesenamun, gently anoints him with perfume. The entire piece was layered in gold and silver, inlaid with brilliant blue faience and semi-precious stones, a snapshot of royal life frozen in precious materials. But this golden splendor was surrounded by the utterly mundane necessities of eternity. Dismantled chariots, their gold-leafed parts stacked like firewood, promised mobility in the next world. Dozens of exquisitely carved alabaster vases, some still holding the dried residue of precious oils, sat next to simple baskets containing the king's last meal, loaves of bread and dried fruits now 3 millennia old. There were beds and footstools, chests overflowing with linens and clothing, game boards for entertainment, and over 100 carefully packed storage boxes. This was the core purpose of the room. It was not a display for the living, but a functional storage unit for the dead, packed with everything the ancient Egyptians believed a transformed king would require, from transportation and food to ritual objects and symbols of power. The chaos was deliberate, a rushed but complete provisioning for an endless journey. For Carter and Carnarvon, standing in that dusty silence, the overwhelming question was no longer what they could see, but what lay beyond. The antechamber was crowded, but its walls were solid. There had to be a door, a passage leading to the king himself. Their eyes scanned the golden clutter, searching for a break in the pattern, a sealed doorway hidden behind this mountain of history. Amidst that chaotic splendor, one object demanded a second look, not for its size, but for its breathtaking intimacy. The golden throne was a masterpiece of diplomacy carved in wood and precious metals. Its legs were fashioned to resemble those of a lion, symbols of royal strength, yet its entire surface told a softer story. Thin sheets of gold and silver had been meticulously hammered over the carved cedar frame, creating a luminous canvas. Into this precious metal, ancient artisans inlaid thousands of fragments of colored glass, vibrant blue faience, and shimmering calcite, creating scenes of stunning detail. The most telling image is on the high backrest. Here we see not a formal state portrait, but a private, tender moment. The young king, Tutankhamun, sits relaxed in a cushioned chair, one arm resting casually on its back. His queen, Ankhesenamun, stands before him, her figure elegant in a flowing gown. She is gently anointing his shoulder with perfume, a gesture of both affection and ritual purification. They are bathed in the radiant rays of the Aten, the sun disk with its descending hands ending in tiny ankhs, the symbol of life. This single image is a powerful political statement. On one level, it is a profound symbol of the royal marriage, showing the queen as an essential partner in maintaining cosmic order and the king's vitality. But the presence of the Aten is the real clue. This sun disk was the sole god worshipped by Tutankhamun's father, the heretic pharaoh Akhenaten. By placing this symbol prominently on his throne, Tutankhamun was doing something remarkable. He was not erasing his father's legacy, but perhaps integrating it. The throne may have been a cherished object from his childhood in the city of Amarna, a direct artistic link to the revolutionary court he was born into. As an adult king now restoring the old gods, he could have had this image chiseled away. He did not, he kept it, even as he changed his own name to honor Amun. This golden chair, then, is more than furniture. It is a bridge between two worlds, a boy's connection to a controversial father, and a king's careful message of continuity in a land desperate for stability. It shows a ruler navigating an impossible inheritance, holding a piece of his past even as he tried to steer his nation toward a familiar future. Yet for all the treasures crammed into that first room, a palpable silence emanated from one wall. There, partially hidden behind one of the great animal couches, stood a sealed doorway unlike the others. It was flanked not by mere symbols but by two towering, life-sized statues carved from wood. These were the king's eternal sentinels. Each figure depicted Tutankhamun in the classic striding pose of a ruler, 1 foot forward as if caught in the act of stepping from this world into the next. But their appearance was startling, designed to be both beautiful and terrifying. Their skin was painted a deep, lustrous black, a color representing the rich, fertile silt of the Nile flood that brought life to Egypt. This was the color of resurrection and rebirth. In stark contrast, their kilts, headdresses, and regalia were sheathed in brilliant gold, symbolizing the imperishable flesh of the gods themselves. They were a duality made manifest, embodying the eternal cycle of death and divinity. These were not simple decorations. In the ancient Egyptian belief system, statues were vessels for spiritual energy. These two guardians, standing watch over the sealed portal, were charged with a sacred, magical duty. They were the active protectors of the threshold, imbued with spells and the authority of the gods to repel any evil force, any intruding spirit, or any human thief who dared to violate the king's final resting place. Their unblinking eyes of inlaid quartz and obsidian stared directly at anyone who approached, a silent warning that had held for over 3,000 years. To stand before them was to feel the weight of that ancient purpose. They were the final barrier between the antechamber's public splendor and the most private, sacred space of all, the burial chamber where the pharaoh's mummy lay. Everything in the tomb so far had been preparation, supplies for the journey, but these statues marked the true beginning of the mystery. What or who were they protecting with such solemn power? The answer lay just beyond the plaster and stone of that sealed wall, waiting in the dark. That sealed doorway, guarded by the twin statues, held its secret for another 3 months. Howard Carter faced an agonizing new weight, but this time it was a matter of scientific necessity. The antechamber was a fragile, 3-dimensional maze. Every single object, from the golden throne to the dried fruit in the baskets, had to be meticulously catalogued, photographed in situ, and then carefully removed before they could even approach the inner wall. It was a monumental task of patience and precision. Finally, in mid-February of 1923, the antechamber stood empty, revealing the sealed wall in its entirety. The moment of truth had arrived. With Lord Carnarvon and a small group of dignitaries and officials watching, Carter once again began the delicate work of dismantling the masonry. He made a small hole just large enough to peer through. He shone a light inside, and what he saw took his breath away. He later wrote that the sight left him dumb with amazement. The beam of his flashlight fell upon what appeared to be a solid wall of gold. It was not a wall. It was the outermost panel of a gigantic, gilded shrine that filled the entire burial chamber from floor to ceiling, leaving only a narrow, 2-foot walkway around its edges. This was the heart of the tomb, the innermost sanctum. The room itself was surprisingly small, yet every inch of its walls was covered in vivid, beautifully preserved paintings. These were not scenes of earthly glory, but a map of the perilous journey through the underworld. They showed the young king welcomed by the goddess Nut on the ceiling and guided by familiar gods. The jackal-headed Anubis, protector of cemeteries, led the way. The green-skinned Osiris, god of the dead and resurrection, stood ready to receive him. These paintings were a visual spell book, a series of instructions and divine protections to ensure Tutankhamun's successful rebirth. But all attention was fixed on that colossal golden structure in the center. As Carter and his team squeezed into the narrow corridor around it, they realized this was not one shrine, but a series of them, like a set of perfect Russian dolls. The outermost was a massive canopy of gilded wood, its sides decorated with inlaid blue faience and protective magic spells. With immense care, they unbolted its double doors. Inside, they found a second, slightly smaller shrine, also sealed, then a third, and then a fourth. Each was a masterpiece of ancient carpentry and gold leaf, each layer a physical and magical barrier designed to shield the king's remains from any harm. It took many more days of painstaking work to reach the innermost shrine. When they finally opened its doors, they were met not with the king, but with another breathtaking sight. A single, colossal block of carved red quartzite filled the space. This was the sarcophagus, the stone coffin. Resting upon it, protecting it, was a simple but powerful sculpture of a goddess. Her wings were outstretched in a protective embrace, as if she had been holding her vigil, silently and perfectly, for 32 centuries. The air in the chamber was still, heavy with the scent of history and anticipation. The golden walls seemed to pulse in the lamplight. They had reached the final container, but the greatest secret of all was still hidden inside. The solid quartzite lid weighed over 1,200 kilograms, a slab of stone that had not been moved in 32 centuries. Howard Carter's team faced a monumental engineering challenge right there in the cramped burial chamber. They constructed a complex system of pulleys and block and tackle, threading ropes and chains through the narrow space with agonizing care. A single slip could shatter the sarcophagus or damage the priceless shrines surrounding it. With breath held, they began to hoist. The stone groaned, a deep, resonant sound that had not been heard since the priests of the 18th dynasty sealed the tomb. Slowly, impossibly slowly, the massive lid began to rise. As it lifted, a collective gasp swept the room. The interior was not empty stone. Instead, they saw a form carved from the finest alabaster, glowing with a soft, inner light in the lamplight. It was a lid, but not of stone. This was the outermost coffin, shaped in the perfect likeness of the king himself, lying in serene repose. The young pharaoh was depicted with the crossed arms of Osiris, clutching the royal crook and flail, symbols of his authority. His face was calm, idealized, and painted with delicate colors that looked freshly applied. The entire figure was encased within a nest of linen shrouds, now brittle with age, but the impression was unmistakable. They were looking at a human form, a shell protecting the body within. The excitement was electric, but the work was far from over. This alabaster shell was itself a lid, sealing the contents of the sarcophagus. With the same meticulous care, they lifted this sculpted cover. Beneath it, revealed in the shadowy interior of the red stone box, was another coffin. This one was made of wood, but covered in a brilliant skin of gold foil and inlaid glass, creating a dazzling, shimmering image of the king. It was even more detailed, more personal. And nestled around it, tucked into every space between the coffin and the sarcophagus walls, were flowers. Wreaths and collars of faded papyrus and olive leaves, the last tender offerings from a funeral ceremony 3,000 years past. The scent of ancient pollen seemed to hang in the air, the presence of these simple, organic tributes lying atop the unimaginable gold was profoundly moving. It was a whisper of human grief amidst the overwhelming divine spectacle. But even this magnificent gilded coffin was not the end. It too was a lid. The team worked for hours more, carefully extracting the second coffin from the stone embrace of the sarcophagus. Only then could they undo its clasps and lift its own lid. What they saw next would define the discovery for all of history. Lying within was a third and final coffin, and it was made of something that defied belief. It was not wood covered in gold leaf. It was solid, hammered gold from head to toe. The glow from their lamps reflected off its surface with a deep, liquid, almost blinding radiance. This was the king's ultimate golden skin. The weight was staggering, over 240 pounds of pure, precious metal, formed into the perfected image of Tutankhamun. The detail was exquisite. The face was a portrait, younger and more delicate than the idealized masks of the outer coffins. His hands were crossed, holding the same royal insignia, but now crafted from solid gold and inlaid with brilliant blue glass and quartz. Every finger, every eyelash, every curl of the ceremonial beard was rendered with meticulous care. This was not a container, it was a transformation. The ancient artisans had worked to create a body of imperishable metal for the king's spirit to inhabit for eternity. And inside this priceless shell of gold, wrapped in linen and amulets, lay the mummified remains of the boy pharaoh himself. The journey through shrines, stone and wood had ended here at this breathtaking, silent figure of gold. The search for the king was over, but the mystery of the man was just beginning. Yet the greatest treasure still lay concealed within that final golden shell. After the overwhelming spectacle of the solid gold coffin, the team faced their most delicate task yet. The lid of this innermost coffin was secured not just by pins, but by 3 millennia of hardened sacred resins that had been poured over the mummy as part of the burial ritual. These resins had fused the gold lid to the coffin's body, creating a single, seamless golden prison. To open it, they had to apply careful, targeted heat, softening the ancient pitch just enough to break the seal without damaging the priceless metal. The tension in the burial chamber was palpable. Finally, the clasps gave way. As they lifted the heavy golden lid, the lamplight fell upon the single most famous object to emerge from the ancient world. It was the death mask of Tutankhamun. This was not merely a covering for a dead man's face. It was a portrait of a god-king crafted for eternity. Weighing over 24 pounds of solid, hammered gold, it is a masterpiece of ancient artistry and profound religious belief. The mask shows the young pharaoh in a state of serene, idealized perfection. He wears the striped Nemes headcloth, the traditional royal headdress, its folds rendered in exquisite detail. Upon his brow sit the 2 great protectors of Egypt, the cobra Wadjet representing Lower Egypt and the vulture Nekhbit representing Upper Egypt. Together, they symbolize a unified kingdom and the fierce divine power that would strike down the king's enemies in the afterlife. The face itself is a study in calm authority, with eyes outlined in brilliant blue glass meant to imitate lapis lazuli, and eyebrows and eyeliner inlaid with the same deep blue stone. The beard, a symbol of divinity, is a separate piece of gold, braided and curved in the style of Osiris, the god of the dead. But the mask's true purpose was functional, even scientific, in the context of ancient magic. In Egyptian belief, the head was the seat of a person's identity and senses. To enter the afterlife successfully, the gods had to recognize the king instantly. This mask was his permanent, unchanging face, a divine identifier that would never decay. More importantly, it was a powerful amulet. Gold was considered the flesh of the gods, imperishable and radiant. By encasing his head in this material, the king was transformed, his mortal features replaced with an immortal shell. This transformation was not passive. On the back of the mask and across the linen wrappings of the mummy itself, priests had inscribed spells from the Book of the Dead. One specific spell, meant for the mask itself, is a plea to the divine mother goddesses for protection. It asks for their safeguarding over the king's head, so that all his bodily parts might be reunited and function perfectly in the next world. The mask, therefore, was a battery of magical energy, a device to ensure not just recognition, but the complete and functional resurrection of the whole person. To look into its placid, golden eyes is to stare directly into the ancient Egyptian mind, to see their deepest hopes for life after death forged into a single, breathtaking object of art and faith. This face, designed to last for all time, would soon become the very symbol of ancient Egypt itself. But the mummy it protected held secrets that would rewrite medical history and plunge the boy king into a modern scandal of a very different kind. But the golden mask concealed a body in crisis. When Howard Carter and his team finally lifted the heavy lid, they were met with a heartbreaking sight. The mummy of Tutankhamun was not a pristine, carefully preserved figure, but a tragic figure entombed in a solid block of blackened resin. the sacred oils and unguents poured over the king during his burial ceremony had not dried. Over 3,000 years, they had hardened into a rock-solid, tar-like mass that cemented the king's body irrevocably to the bottom of the solid gold coffin. The resins had acted like a powerful adhesive, fusing the linen wrappings, the golden mask, and the fragile remains into one inseparable unit. Carter, faced with this unexpected obstacle and under immense pressure, made a fateful decision. To retrieve the amulets and jewelry sewn within the bandages, and to examine the royal remains, he would have to cut the mummy free. His team used hot knives and chisels, carefully applying heat to soften the pitch before segmenting the body. They removed the head, sawed through the major joints, and essentially dismembered the king in order to extract him from his golden shell. While this allowed for the recovery of priceless artifacts, it caused catastrophic damage to the skeletal structure, fracturing bones and scattering the fragile remains. It was a necessary violence for its time, but it forever altered the primary evidence. For decades, the physical truth of Tutankhamun lay fragmented and obscured by this well-intentioned assault. The real story of his life and death remained locked inside those broken bones, waiting for a technology that could see without touching. That technology arrived with the 21st century. In 2005, a team of Egyptian and international scientists performed a full computed tomography scan on the king's remains. For the first time, they could peer non-invasively through the linen, the resins, and the fractures to see the boy behind the mask. The image that emerged was not of a powerful god-king, but of a frail and sickly young man. Tutankhamun was about 18 or 19 years old when he died. The scans revealed a left foot that was severely deformed. The bones were necrotic, meaning the tissue had died, and the foot was twisted inward at the ankle, a condition known as club foot. He would have walked with a pronounced limp, likely requiring the use of a cane, over 130 of which were found in his tomb, not ceremonial items but practical aids. Furthermore, his left leg showed a significant fracture just above the knee, an injury that showed no signs of healing. This suggests the break occurred very close to the time of his death. The genetic analysis added another layer of complexity. DNA testing revealed traces of the deadliest strain of malaria, Plasmodium falciparum, in his system. He had suffered multiple severe malarial infections throughout his short life. So, what finally killed the young pharaoh? The debate has raged for a century. Was it the fractured leg leading to a fatal infection like gangrene, perhaps from a chariot accident or a fall? Was it the debilitating effects of malaria weakening his system beyond recovery? Or was it a perfect storm, a combination of a genetic predisposition from generations of royal inbreeding, a crippling physical disability, a traumatic injury, and a ravaging disease? The evidence points not to a single villain, but to a body under siege. The Golden King, draped in divine splendor, was a deeply human figure, battling pain and illness until his young body simply gave out. His tomb, filled with objects for a vigorous afterlife, becomes infinitely more poignant when we understand the fragile, suffering person they were meant to empower. Beyond the burial chamber, a single doorway led to a smaller, more sacred space. This was the treasury, a room not of practical supplies but of pure ritual magic. Where the antechamber felt like a cluttered storeroom, the treasury was a carefully arranged chapel dedicated to the king's transformation. The most commanding object was a great gilded wooden shrine standing nearly as tall as a person. Inside this miniature temple, resting on a slender alabaster frame, was a chest of the purest Egyptian alabaster. This was the canopic shrine, and it held one of the most intimate secrets of the burial. The chest contained 4 smaller compartments, each one a masterpiece of miniature sculpture. These were the canopic jars, carved from single blocks of alabaster and topped with exquisitely sculpted lids in the likeness of the young king's own head. Inside these jars, wrapped in tiny linen packages, were the pharaoh's preserved internal organs, his liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines. The Egyptians believed these organs were necessary for the afterlife, but the body had to be purified, so they were carefully embalmed and stored separately. Guarding this sacred shrine was a figure of breathtaking beauty and solemn duty. A life-sized wooden statue of the goddess Selket stood watch, her arms outstretched in a protective gesture. She was covered in a shimmering skin of gilded plaster, and her identifying symbol, a scorpion, rested gracefully upon her head. Selket was a guardian against venom and evil, a divine protector chosen to watch over the king's most vulnerable remains. But the treasury held more than just the king's organs. Lining the walls were dozens of model boats crafted from wood and painted with meticulous detail. These were not toys, they were magical vessels. The ancient Egyptians believed the sun god Ra traveled through the sky by day in a solar bark, and through the perilous underworld by night in another. The deceased king needed his own fleet to join this eternal cycle. Some boats were for sailing the celestial rivers, others for fishing and provisioning in the paradise of the afterlife. Perhaps the most poignant objects, however, were the army of little figures standing in neat rows. These were the shabti workers, carved from wood, faience, or stone. Each one was a tiny servant, a statue inscribed with a specific spell from the Book of the Dead. The spell commanded the figure to answer the call if the king was summoned to perform manual labor in the afterlife. "Here I am," it would say, "I will do it." Tutankhamun was provided with over 400 of these diligent substitutes, ensuring he would reign in eternity without ever having to toil. This small room, then, was the engine of his resurrection. Here, his physical essence was guarded, his spiritual transportation was prepared, and his eternal leisure was guaranteed. It was a perfect, self-contained blueprint for immortality, waiting silently in the dark. Yet one more doorway beckoned, a low opening cut into the wall of the treasury. This led to the final chamber, a space so crammed with belongings it felt less like a curated room and more like an ancient royal attic. Known as the Annex, this was the overflow storage, a last-ditch repository for everything that could not be neatly organized into the antechamber, burial chamber, or treasury. If the other rooms held the sacred and the ceremonial, the Annex held the practical and the personal, a bewildering jumble of daily life packed in with frantic urgency. The sheer volume was staggering. Beds and folding stools were stacked haphazardly against the walls. Baskets held more loaves of bread, joints of meat, and dried fruits, a surplus of eternal provisions. Dozens of elegant white wine jars, their clay stoppers still sealed, stood in rows, each labeled with the vineyard, the year, and the name of the chief vintner, promising an endless supply of fine drink. There were weapons, bows, arrows, and throwing sticks for hunting fowl in the marshes of the afterlife. Beautifully crafted game boards like the one for the popular game of Senet, which symbolized the perilous journey through the underworld, were tucked beside boxes of playing pieces. Alabaster vessels, bronze razors, and jars of cosmetics sat next to chests filled with linens and clothing. This chaotic assemblage speaks directly to the rushed circumstances of the burial. The tomb's planners had a finite amount of time to gather a king's worth of possessions for eternity. The Annex became the catch-all solution, a place to deposit anything and everything else that tradition or affection demanded he should have. There was no time for elegant presentation. The priority was simple: get it all inside and seal the door. This final, crowded room completes the picture not of a serene, prepared eternity, but of a profound and hurried devotion. It underscores the ancient Egyptian conviction that the afterlife was a direct continuation of earthly existence, requiring every conceivable comfort, tool, and pleasure. From the golden mask to the simplest wooden stool, every object was a vital piece of the puzzle, an essential component in the grand magical operation to ensure a young king's survival beyond death. A shadow seemed to fall across the discovery almost immediately. Just months after that first breathless glimpse into the tomb, the man who made it all possible was dead. Lord Carnarvon, the expedition's patron, succumbed to a sudden and severe illness in Cairo. The official cause was pneumonia, developing from an infected mosquito bite he had accidentally aggravated while shaving. He died on April 5, 1923, a mere 4 months after entering the burial chamber. At the exact moment of his death, back in England, the lights in his family home reportedly flickered and went out. His beloved dog was said to have let out a howl and dropped dead. The press seized upon these eerie details with a frenzy, weaving them into a sensational narrative, the curse of the pharaoh. The story wrote itself. An ancient inscription, supposedly found over the tomb's entrance, warned that death would come on swift wings to those who disturbed the king's sleep. Newspapers around the world printed it as fact, though no such inscription was ever documented by Carter or his team. The legend grew with each new tragedy linked to the expedition. An American financier who visited the tomb died of pneumonia. A British industrialist who toured the site was shot by his wife. A radiologist who X-rayed the mummy allegedly died from a mysterious illness. Each passing was another brick in the wall of the curse, a modern superstition born from the collision of ancient mystery and sensational journalism. But what truth lies beneath the legend? Science offers far more plausible and equally fascinating explanations. A tomb sealed for 3,000 years is not a sterile environment. It is a petri dish. When Carter first breached the burial chamber, he noted the warm, strangely scented air. That air was likely thick with ancient spores. Modern analysis suggests the sealed spaces could have harbored toxic molds and bacteria that flourished on the organic materials left inside, the food offerings, the linens, the resins. Inhaling these concentrated, ancient pathogens could have severely compromised the lungs, particularly of someone like Carnarvon, who was already in poor health. His death from a secondary infection following a simple bite is tragically logical, not supernatural. Furthermore, the curse relies heavily on selective storytelling. Howard Carter, the man who actually opened the coffin and handled the mummy, lived for another 16 years, dying of natural causes at 64. Many other core team members also lived long lives. When you consider the average life expectancy at the time and the age of some expedition members, a number of deaths within a few years is statistically unremarkable. The press simply ignored those who lived, focusing only on the deaths that could be tenuously linked. The real power of the curse, however, was never about literal magic. It was a cultural phenomenon, a perfect storm of timing and psychology. The world in the 1920s was reeling from a global war and a flu pandemic, a place where death felt random and inexplicable. The discovery of Tutankhamun was a portal to a lost, magical world. It felt only fitting that such a world would defend itself with ancient, invisible power. The curse gave a narrative shape to chance, a poetic consequence for violating the sacred. It transformed archaeological rigor into a Gothic horror story, making the distant past feel imminently, dangerously alive. In doing so, it ensured the boy king's tomb would captivate the public imagination far beyond the artifacts themselves, wrapping a scientific marvel in an enduring shroud of mystery that persists to this day. But this careful preservation of the organs reveals a startling omission, one that strikes at the very core of ancient Egyptian faith. When the royal mummy was examined, the body cavity was found to be empty, packed only with linen. This was standard practice, but a specific, vital organ was not in its expected place. The liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines were each nestled in their own golden coffinet within the alabaster canopic jars. Yet the heart, the single most important organ for the afterlife, was missing from the chest. This was not merely an oversight, it was a profound and potentially catastrophic ritual failure. In Egyptian belief, the heart was the seat of intelligence, emotion, and memory. It was the essence of a person. In the hall of judgment after death, the deceased's heart would be placed on a scale and weighed against the feather of Maat, the goddess of truth and cosmic order. If the heart was light, free from sin, the person would be granted eternal life. If it was heavy with wrongdoing, it would be devoured by a monstrous creature and the person would cease to exist. Without a heart, this crucial judgment could not even begin. So what happened to Tutankhamun's heart? The mystery has fueled decades of scholarly debate. One theory suggests a simple, tragic embalming error. The process was complex and rushed. Perhaps the priests, working against time to prepare the young king, accidentally damaged or destroyed the heart during its removal. They might have then discreetly disposed of it, choosing an empty chest cavity over a damaged, ritually useless organ. Another possibility points to modern hands. Could Howard Carter's team, during their difficult extraction of the mummy from the hardened resins, have misplaced or even destroyed the fragile cardiac tissue without realizing its significance? They were focused on freeing the jewelry and amulets, and the distinction between linen packing and an actual organ might have been lost in the chaotic process. But the most compelling theory is one of deliberate magical substitution. The Egyptians were pragmatic in their spirituality. If the physical heart was unavailable, they would create a stand-in. Among the 143 amulets found on the king's body was a magnificent large scarab, carved from a vibrant green stone and wrapped within the mummy's bandages over the chest. This was a heart scarab, a powerful amulet inscribed with a spell from the Book of the Dead, specifically chapter 30, which pleads with the heart not to testify against its owner during the weighing. Perhaps the embalming priests, finding the heart unsuitable, performed a secret ritual. They may have mummified a small piece of it or used another symbolic material, sealed it within this scarab amulet, and placed it over the king's chest, effectively creating a new, magical heart that would speak only truth before the gods. This elegant solution would satisfy divine law while concealing a mortal error. The empty cavity, then, is not evidence of neglect, but a silent testament to a frantic, last-ditch act of sacred problem-solving, a hidden layer of drama in the already rushed burial of history's most famous king. The king's treasures were not just golden but celestial. Among the countless artifacts, one object stands out for its beauty and its profound scientific mystery. On the right thigh of Tutankhamun's mummy, carefully wrapped within the linen bandages, lay a ceremonial dagger of breathtaking craftsmanship. Its hilt was a masterpiece of gold filigree, decorated with delicate floral patterns and a stunning crystal pommel. The sheath was equally magnificent, carved from fine gold and adorned with a pattern of lilies, feathers, and a jackal's head, all leading to a lanyard of tiny gold beads. But the true marvel was the blade itself. It was not bronze, the common metal of the age. It was a smooth, unrusted, silvery metal that had survived millennia in perfect condition. For decades, experts assumed it was an early and exceptionally rare example of smelted iron, a metal so precious in the Bronze Age that it was worth more than gold. But in 2016, researchers finally got a definitive answer. Using portable X-ray fluorescence spectrometry, a non-invasive technique that analyzes chemical composition, they scanned the blade. The results were astonishing. The dagger was not just made of iron. Its chemical signature showed a high percentage of nickel, nearly 11%, along with traces of cobalt. This specific nickel-to-cobalt ratio is the unmistakable fingerprint of meteoric iron, metal forged not in an earthly furnace, but in the heart of a dying star and delivered to Earth from space. This single analysis transformed a beautiful artifact into a scientific revelation. In the Bronze Age, centuries before iron smelting became common, iron objects were incredibly rare and revered. The ancient Egyptians had a specific term for this material. They called it Bia Enpet, which literally translates to iron from the sky. They understood its celestial origin. Finding a chunk of this rare, silvery metal that had fallen from the heavens would have been seen as a direct gift from the gods. For a pharaoh, a living god on earth, a dagger forged from this divine material was the ultimate symbol of power. It connected him directly to the cosmos, a piece of the eternal heavens transformed into a weapon of earthly and spiritual authority. This was not merely a functional blade. It was a theological statement, a physical manifestation of the king's celestial right to rule, placed on his body to accompany him into the afterlife. The dagger proves that Tutankhamun's burial was stocked with the rarest materials the world could offer, from the gold of the earth to the very iron of the stars. But the walls of the burial chamber may have held one last secret. In 2015, a new theory electrified the world of Egyptology, suggesting that Howard Carter's greatest discovery was in fact only the beginning. British archaeologist Nicholas Reeves, after studying high-resolution scans of the tomb's painted walls, proposed a startling idea. He argued that the famous burial chamber showed architectural features consistent with a tomb that had been adapted and expanded. The dimensions, the placement of doors, and even the scenes on the walls seemed to hint that this space was not originally intended for a king. Reeves put forth a breathtaking hypothesis. He believed that Tutankhamun's modest tomb was actually an antechamber tacked onto the end of a much larger, original burial designed for a far more significant ruler. His candidate for that original occupant was none other than Nefertiti, the legendary great royal wife of Akhenaten and Tutankhamun's likely stepmother, whose own tomb has never been found. Reeves specifically pointed to faint, linear traces beneath the plaster and paint on the north and west walls. He interpreted these as the outlines of sealed doorways, portals to hidden chambers that could contain Nefertiti's undisturbed burial and a treasure that might even rival Tutankhamun's. The evidence was subtle, based on texture and pattern, but the implication was monumental. Ground-penetrating radar scans commissioned in late 2015 seemed to support the idea, detecting anomalies and voids behind the walls that could be man-made chambers. For a moment, it felt like history was about to repeat itself, that another sealed door awaited discovery just inches away from where the world had stood in awe for a century. The debate that followed was fierce and public. Other teams conducted their own radar surveys. Some supported Reeves, finding compelling evidence of hollow spaces. Others contradicted the findings entirely, their scans showing only solid, natural bedrock. The scientific community was divided, and the Egyptian authorities faced immense international pressure to investigate. The promise of finding Nefertiti, one of ancient Egypt's most powerful and enigmatic women, was a siren call too powerful to ignore. In 2016, a meticulous new round of radar scans was conducted by a team from the Polytechnic University of Turin. Their results, announced in 2018, were definitive and disappointing. After analyzing the data with the latest technology, they concluded there were no hidden chambers, no voids, no secret doors. The anomalies detected earlier were likely natural variations in the limestone bedrock. Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities officially closed the investigation, stating that the theory of hidden chambers was, in their view, conclusively debunked. This modern chapter of speculation, which had burned so brightly for 3 years, ended not with a grand discovery, but with the quiet certainty of science. The walls of Tutankhamun's tomb, it seems, have finally given up all their secrets, yet the very fact that such a theory could captivate the world speaks to the enduring power of that small space in the Valley of the Kings. We still look at it and wonder if we have truly found everything, proving that the tomb's greatest treasure may be its endless capacity to make us dream. This silent world was not without its own subtle fragrance. Among the jumble of treasures in the annex and treasury, dozens of elegant alabaster jars stood in quiet rows, their smooth, cool surfaces carved with the names of gods and kings. These were not mere decorations, they were containers for some of the most precious substances in the ancient world, perfumed oils and unguents meant for the king's eternal care. When Howard Carter's team first opened these vessels, they were met with a startling discovery, a faint, ghostly aroma that had somehow lingered for over 3,000 years. It was not the scent of decay, but something dry, spicy, and resinous, the last whisper of a vanished ritual. For the ancient Egyptians, scent was far more than a pleasant luxury. It was a direct connection to the divine. The gods themselves were said to smell of sacred incense and fragrant oils. To be anointed with these substances was to be purified and sanctified, to take on the very essence of divinity. This is why the mummification process involved massive quantities of these precious unguents. Resins like frankincense and myrrh were poured over the body and the linen wrappings, both to preserve the flesh and to transform it into a sacred, aromatic object worthy of the gods. The oils found in Tutankhamun's tomb represented the pinnacle of this ancient art. They were likely blends of imported frankincense from the Horn of Africa, myrrh from the Arabian Peninsula, and perhaps rare local ingredients like the oil of the moringa tree or the essence of lilies. Creating and acquiring these scents was an enterprise of state, involving long, dangerous trade routes and immense cost, making a single jar worth more than its weight in gold. Each alabaster vessel, therefore, was a double offering. It provided the king with the physical means for his purification and pleasure in the afterlife, a way to forever smell like a god. But it also served as a potent economic and political symbol, a statement that even in death, this young pharaoh commanded the wealth and reach to procure the rarest treasures of the living world. The faint scent that escaped those jars was the scent of power, devotion, and a profound belief that beauty itself was a necessary fuel for eternity. Buried alongside the golden gods and magical amulets were the most humble yet essential provisions. Stacked in simple woven baskets and sealed within pottery jars were the staples of an ancient Egyptian diet, a practical grocery list for eternity. There were sacks of emmer wheat and barley, the grains that formed the backbone of their bread and beer. Dozens of baskets held dried dates, figs, and dom pom nuts, offering sweetness and sustenance. But the tomb also contained more elaborate fare. Carefully wrapped packages held cuts of salted and preserved meat, tender duck, ribs of beef, even a fully cooked goat haunch. These were not mere symbolic offerings placed for show and then taken away by priests. In the Egyptian view of the afterlife, the spiritual essence of the person, known as the ka, required actual physical nourishment to survive forever. The ka was a kind of life force double, a spiritual counterpart that remained closely tied to the tomb and the mummified body. It was believed this spirit could actually consume the essence of the food left for it. This is why the storage was so meticulous and so abundant. The 142 baskets of fruit, the 30 large jars of wine, each with its clay stopper carefully sealed and inscribed with the name of the vineyard, the vintage year, and even the chief vintner. This was a permanent, divinely sanctioned pantry. Imagine a label reading, Year 5, Sweet Wine of the House of Aten from the Western River, Chief Vintner Ka. This was about quality and continuity. The wine wasn't just alcohol, it was a sacred intoxicant linked to the gods, and ensuring the king had a good vintage from a specific estate for all time was a serious matter. This careful provisioning reveals a world view where death was not an end but a relocation. The afterlife was a direct mirror of this one with the same needs and pleasures. The king would need to eat, drink, and be sustained just as he had in life, so the planners of his burial stocked his eternal home as if for a very, very long journey. They packed what he liked, from the everyday bread to the luxury of aged wine, ensuring his ka would never know hunger or thirst. In these simple baskets of grain and labeled jars, we see not the fear of death, but a profound and practical confidence in a continued existence, planned down to the very last meal. The king's eternal pantry was stocked, his body anointed, but he could not face the gods dressed for a simple meal. Within the countless chests and boxes lay an entire royal wardrobe, a collection of personal garments so vast it redefined our understanding of ancient Egyptian daily life. Howard Carter's team discovered hundreds of textile items, each one a whisper of the boy behind the golden mask. there were finely woven linen tunics, some so delicate and expertly pleated that the tiny folds survived 3 millennia. There were gloves, a rare find that suggests a need for protection or perhaps a fashion statement. They found sashes, belts, and even undergarments, simple loincloths that remind us this deity was also a human being who got dressed each morning. The craftsmanship was staggering. One tunic was adorned with over 3,000 gold rosettes, each one sewn meticulously onto the fabric so that the king would have shimmered with every movement. But the true masterpieces were the broad collars. These were not necklaces in the traditional sense, but magnificent, semicircular mantles made of countless tiny beads of faience, gold, and semi-precious stones, strung together in intricate patterns of lotus flowers, berries, and geometric designs. To wear one was to have a rainbow of protective symbolism resting on your shoulders, a radiant halo of color and magic meant to shield the king's neck, the vital pathway between his divine head and his mortal body. Yet for all this splendor, perhaps the most telling items were found on the floor. Scattered throughout the tomb were sandals, over 100 pairs in total. This was a king prepared for every terrain of the afterlife. Some were practical, made of sturdy woven reed or simple leather, worn and comfortable, the kind you might wear for a stroll in the palace gardens. Others were purely ceremonial, crafted from wood and covered in thin sheets of gold, or made entirely from delicate beadwork, beautiful but utterly unwalkable. One extraordinary pair was even designed with enemies on the soles. Each sandal bore an image of a bound Nubian prisoner on one foot and a bound Asiatic on the other, so that with every step the king would symbolically trample the nations that threatened Egypt. This was power literally underfoot. This immense wardrobe reveals a profound and practical belief. The afterlife was not a vague spiritual realm. It was a continuation of existence with all its physical needs and social rituals. You would need to be properly dressed for a ceremony before Osiris, for a hunt in the celestial marshes, for a relaxing moment in your eternal home. The linen, the gold rosettes, the beaded sandals, they were all essential equipment. They tell us that the ancient Egyptians did not see death as an escape from the material world, but as a promotion into a perfected version of it where you could, quite literally, take it all with you, down to your most comfortable pair of shoes. The king's eternal wardrobe promised a life of ceremony and comfort, but what of his hours of rest? Tucked beside the golden shrines and alabaster jars were objects that reveal a more personal dimension of the young pharaoh. These were his games, his toys, his tools for leisure in an endless hereafter. Among the most stunning is a game box crafted from ebony and ivory, a portable masterpiece that unfolds to reveal not one but 2 distinct playing surfaces. On one side is the board for the game of 20, also known as Mehen, the serpent game. Its spiral path, carved in the shape of a coiled snake, was a race for tokens, a simple and perhaps lively contest. But the other side of the box holds something far more profound. This is the board for Senate, the game of passing. At first glance, it resembles a simple checkerboard with 30 squares arranged in 3 rows of 10. But this was no ordinary pastime. It was a direct metaphor for the soul's most perilous journey. Each square on the board represented a specific stage or challenge in the underworld. Players would throw casting sticks to move their pieces along the path, navigating hazards like the House of Netting, a trap for the unprepared, or the Waters of Chaos, a symbolic abyss. The goal was to reach the final squares, which represented rebirth and union with the gods. To play Sen, it was to ritually rehearse one's own salvation, to magically influence the outcome of the journey you would undertake after death. For Tutankhamun to have such a finely made set placed in his tomb meant he was equipped not just to play, but to succeed in this divine contest for eternity. But the king's leisure was not confined to symbolic board games. Leaning against walls and packed in chests were hunting weapons of exquisite quality. There were simple throw sticks carved from ivory and shaped like boomerangs, used for knocking waterfowl from the sky in the lush marshes. More impressive were the composite bows, sophisticated weapons made from layers of wood, horn, and sinew, glued together to create a powerful spring. These were not the weapons of war found in other royal tombs, but the tools of sport. The ancient Egyptians saw hunting, particularly in the papyrus thickets, as a noble pursuit that demonstrated mastery over chaos represented by wild animals. Scenes of the king hunting from his chariot were common in art, symbolizing his role as the protector of cosmic order. By including these functional, beautiful bows and throw sticks, the burial planners were ensuring Tutankhamun could continue this virtuous and pleasurable activity forever. He could spend his days in an eternal, perfect version of the Nile Delta, where the birds were always plentiful and his aim was always true. Together, these objects of play paint a complete and deeply human picture of the afterlife's promise. It was not a static existence of endless prayer or solemn ceremony. The Egyptians envisioned it as the ultimate perfected life. You would need your finest clothes, your favorite foods and wines, and of course, your favorite ways to pass the time. You would need games to challenge your mind and symbolize your triumphs, and sports to engage your body and demonstrate your skill. The presence of a child's chair and a box of toy weapons in the annex further hints at a king who may have held onto relics of his own youth. This careful provisioning for eternity tells us that for all their elaborate theology and magic, the ancient Egyptians hoped for something wonderfully familiar beyond the grave. They hoped for a world that still had room for a game with friends on a quiet afternoon, or the thrill of a successful hunt at dawn. In preparing Tutankhamun's tomb, they sought to give the boy king not just immortality but happiness. These lightweight marvels of ancient engineering were stacked in pieces against a wall, their parts meticulously disassembled to fit the crowded space. The 6 chariots of Tutankhamun were the Formula One racers of the ancient world, the pinnacle of Bronze Age technology and design. Far from the heavy, clunky vehicles often depicted in films, these were feather-light machines built for speed and agility. Their frames were crafted from flexible, seasoned wood elm and birch for the axles and poles, resilient tamarisk for the curved floorboards, all bent and joined with a precision that speaks of generations of master craftsmen. The wheels were a masterpiece alone, each with 6 slender spokes carved to reduce weight while maintaining incredible strength. Their rims bound in leather tires that would have provided a whisper-quiet, smooth ride across the desert floor. And then there was the adornment. Every surface that could be seen was sheathed in gold. Thin sheets of the precious metal were pressed over the wooden frames, then intricately decorated with scenes of the king in action, trampling his enemies or hunting lions, all inlaid with vibrant glass and colored stones. The leather harnesses, preserved by the dry air, were dyed and tooled with elaborate patterns. But why place such magnificent vehicles in a tomb? These chariots were not instruments of war. Their lightweight construction would have shattered in the chaos of battle. Instead, they were the ultimate status symbols of the royal court, designed for 3 very specific purposes. The first was the ceremonial procession. Imagine the young king standing tall in his golden chariot, pulled by a pair of magnificent horses adorned with plumes and bells, parading before his people during a religious festival. It was a moving throne, a way to display his divine power and wealth to the populace. The second purpose was the display of athletic skill and royal authority. Chariot driving was a sophisticated sport, requiring immense balance and coordination to control the horses while navigating at high speeds. Scenes of this were common in tomb paintings, showing the king mastering his team as a demonstration of his control over nature itself. The third and perhaps most personal purpose was for the hunt. The open marshes along the Nile were the pharaoh's traditional hunting grounds, and a chariot provided a stable, mobile platform from which to use a bow or throw sticks. The scenes embossed on the chariots themselves often depict Tutankhamun in the act of hunting, his arrow drawn back, aiming at ostriches or lions. This presents a poignant and puzzling contrast. We know from the scans that the king had a severe club foot and likely walked with a limp, relying on canes. The physical act of standing in a bouncing chariot, balancing while drawing a heavy bow, would have been an immense challenge, if not outright painful. So what do these chariots truly tell us? They may be less about the reality of his daily life and more about the idealized image of kingship. They represent the pharaoh as he was supposed to be, vigorous, athletic, a master of the chaotic natural world. Yet the very presence of so many and the care taken to include them suggests a deep personal connection. Perhaps despite his infirmities, Tutankhamun did participate in hunts from a chariot, even if in a modified or supported way, clinging to the royal tradition with determination. Or perhaps these glittering vehicles were a hopeful provision, magical equipment that would grant him the strong, capable body in the afterlife that was denied to him in life. They are a promise of speed, power, and freedom packed away in pieces, waiting to be reassembled for endless rides under a perfect, eternal sun. Yet for all its astonishing preservation, the tomb was not the perfect time capsule it first appeared. The seals on the outer doors told a hidden story of their own. They were broken and repaired not once but twice in antiquity. This is the quiet truth behind the legend of an untouched tomb. Sometime within a few years, perhaps even months of Tutankhamun's burial, thieves found their way in. They were not after the grand golden shrines or the massive stone sarcophagus. Those were too heavy, too obvious, and far too dangerous to remove under the noses of the necropolis guards patrolling the Valley of the Kings. Instead, the robbers targeted the most valuable and portable treasures. They likely slipped in through a tunnel dug from the surface, bypassing the main entrance. Once inside, they went straight for the small, precious things. The evidence is subtle but telling. In the annex, the room packed with everyday items, many of the beautiful alabaster jars had their lids broken off. The thieves were after the precious perfumed oils inside, substances worth more than their weight in gold. They rummaged through boxes, spilling their contents in their haste. Jewelry, especially small rings, amulets, and inlaid pieces that could be easily melted down or sold, would have been prime targets. Imagine the scene in that cramped, dark space. The flicker of a single oil lamp, shadows dancing over piles of treasure, as desperate hands sifted through the king's belongings, grabbing only what they could carry and quickly escape with. They took what mattered most in the living world, liquid wealth. But then something remarkable happened. The thefts were discovered. The officials of the necropolis, the very priests and guards tasked with protecting the royal tombs, conducted an inspection. They found the breaches, surveyed the damage, and then performed a solemn duty. They tidied up, they straightened the ransacked boxes, they gathered the scattered objects, and they resealed the broken doorways with fresh plaster, stamping them once more with the official seal of the necropolis. This act of bureaucratic care, this simple administrative response, is the single greatest reason we have Tutankhamun's tomb today. By resealing it, they condemned it to obscurity. The repaired plaster blended with the valley floor, the entrance was forgotten, and within a generation or two, even the memory of the boy king's resting place faded beneath the sand. The thieves, in their greed, had taken a fraction of the treasure, but the priests, in their diligence, saved everything that remained for eternity. It makes you wonder, what dazzling pieces did those ancient robbers make off with? A solid gold necklace that once rested on the king's chest, a fistful of gem-studded rings, we will never know. Their loss is our permanent mystery, a ghostly absence that makes the overwhelming presence of what survived all the more miraculous. The gold of the mask was meant to last for eternity, but modern hands proved far less careful. In 2014, a quiet scandal erupted not in a dusty tomb, but under the bright lights of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. During routine cleaning of the golden mask, a shocking discovery was made. The mask's iconic braided beard, a symbol of divine kingship, was not seamlessly attached as it had always appeared. It had been snapped off and then crudely re-glued with a thick, yellowish layer of modern epoxy, a quick and irreversible fix that left a visible, damaging gap. This was not an ancient repair, but a recent and catastrophic error, a secret kept from the world until a German restoration team noticed the damage and raised the alarm. The revelation sparked an international uproar. How could the most famous artifact from ancient Egypt be treated with such reckless disregard? An investigation revealed a story of haste and carelessness. Years earlier, in 2011, the beard had been accidentally broken during a simple cleaning of the mask's display case. Instead of halting work and consulting a team of expert conservators, the museum staff involved panicked. Fearing repercussions, they took matters into their own hands. They used a fast-drying, industrial-grade epoxy adhesive, a material completely unsuitable for a priceless gold artifact. This glue does not just hold, it chemically bonds and is nearly impossible to remove without causing further damage. Worse, they applied far too much, leaving that ugly, conspicuous residue for all to see, a permanent scar on a 3,000-year-old masterpiece. The fallout was swift and severe. 8 museum officials, including high-level curators and restoration experts, were dismissed from their posts. The entire incident exposed a troubling vulnerability in the guardianship of these global treasures. It was a stark reminder that the greatest threats to Tutankhamun's legacy are no longer ancient tomb robbers, but the very real pressures of modern tourism, bureaucracy, and human error. The mask, a symbol of eternal perfection, had become a case study in fragile, temporary custodianship. Yet the story does not end with the scandal. It pivots toward a more hopeful chapter of meticulous care. The damaged mask was entrusted to a joint Egyptian and German conservation team. For over 2 months, they worked with the precision of surgeons. Their first challenge was the nightmare of removing that hardened epoxy without scratching or warping the ancient gold. They used tiny wooden tools, carefully chipping away at the modern glue bit by painstaking bit. Once the beard was free, they faced the delicate task of reattachment. The ancient Egyptians had originally joined the beard with a clever, reversible technique using a small wooden dowel and natural beeswax adhesive. The modern team chose to honor that ancient wisdom. They used a stable, reversible synthetic beeswax, allowing the beard to be securely mounted while ensuring any future conservators could safely remove it if needed. The restoration was a triumph of patience over panic, of science over secrecy. This modern tale of breakage and repair serves as a profound, cautionary epilogue to the discovery in the valley. It reminds us that these objects are not just symbols in glass cases. They are fragile physical links to a vanished world, surviving millennia of darkness only to face new perils in the light. Every fingerprint, every moment of carelessness writes a new line in their long history. The scar on the mask, now properly healed, is a silent teacher. It asks a difficult question of us all, the current guardians of this legacy. Are we worthy of the secrets we have uncovered? The true test of our civilization may not be in finding such wonders, but in proving we have the wisdom and the humility to preserve them. That final, careful repair on the golden mask brings us full circle, from the flicker of a candle in 1922 to the precise lights of a modern laboratory. Our journey through King Tut's tomb has been one of peeling back layers, both literal and symbolic. We began with Howard Carter's breathless glimpse into a golden chaos, a moment that cracked open a sealed world. We walked through the antechamber's magnificent jumble, felt the solemn gaze of the guardian statues, and stood in awe before the nested shrines and the solid gold coffin. We uncovered the scientific secrets locked in his bones, revealing a frail young man battling disease and deformity. We marveled at artifacts forged from meteorites and provisions meant for an eternal feast. We even followed a modern scandal, a reminder that these treasures are still writing their story today. So, what is the ultimate secret of Tutankhamun's tomb? It is not the dagger from space, the missing heart, or even the curse. The tomb's true, staggering revelation is its breathtaking completeness. It is a 3,000-year-old snapshot, a single, preserved moment of an entire civilization's deepest hopes and fears. This one small, rushed burial gives us an instruction manual for the ancient Egyptian soul. It shows us how they dressed their gods, how they envisioned the afterlife as a perfected mirror of this world, and how far they would go, spending generations of wealth and artistry to conquer death itself. In life, Tutankhamun was a minor king, a boy who ruled for a decade and died before he could leave a grand monument. In death, however, he achieved a different kind of immortality. His obscurity became his salvation. Because his tomb was forgotten, it survived to speak for all the pharaohs whose grand tombs were plundered empty. His face in that golden mask has become the face of ancient Egypt for the entire world. He is no longer just a historical figure, he is a bridge. He connects us directly to the minds of people who lived millennia ago. People who believed with absolute certainty that life did not end at the grave but transformed. Every object, from the grandest chariot to the simplest loaf of bread, was a piece of that profound belief. So we leave you with this question. Of all the secrets hidden inside King Tut's tomb, the celestial dagger, the rushed burial, the tragic medical story, the modern misadventures, which one captivated you the most? Which piece of this ancient puzzle made the past feel most vividly alive? Let us know in the comments, and if you want to join us on more journeys into the heart of historical mysteries, be sure to subscribe. The past is waiting, full of stories yet to be told.